I'm going to get right to it. My guest today is truly the dream, ideal, the platonic form of a guest for a comedy history podcast called War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. She has played both The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and the UN International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia as a lawyer, not as a defendant. So she worked in The Hague. I have a podcast. We're both experts. So please welcome Jess Salomon. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I did play The Hague
Yeah,
in a way.
The musical theater to comedian pipeline is where I come from. And as interesting as that is, that's no Hague lawyer to comedian pipeline. Like, did you find the war criminals audience was too easy and you're like, might as well go for the podcast bros that are even more insidious?
I mean, when I started comedy, I feel like I used to say that when it was more true, there was like less control in a comedy club. And I did feel like if there was a bachelorette party of women who, especially one woman, I mean, Bachelorette and her friends, but they really wanted to make it all about them. Like that was harder to deal with.
Yeah.
Like a single war criminal man who just didn't want to be there.
Yeah, they don't heckle
Yeah.
as much, I imagine.
They are also doing a performance, and they are also trying to interrupt the process, but generally they're not acting up in the same way. And there is, unlike in a comedy club, there are people there, the judges and security and everyone else, to keep things under control generally. Although that said, I think perhaps last trial and maybe last moment of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, that was a very dramatic closing to all of it.
Yes.
It was closing time, was an accused, as I don't know if it was as he was getting sentenced. It was probably at his sentencing. He drank poison and killed himself there and then. So, I mean,
Prop comedy.
that was, quite a dramatic end. But to highlight for you the fact that this was a stage for them, because it was all live streamed back to like the quote unquote region, which was the former Yugoslavia, the states of the former Yugoslavia. But in general, most of the accused were Serbian. So basically they were performing for their hometown crowd that was, still on their side.
Yeah, that's interesting. So part of what motivated me to create the podcast is when I would talk about civilians being killed in Gaza, people would comment, "Well, that's war." I guess that's what war is. But I looked into it and no, there are rules. Yes, like there's a kind of law that is even more ignored than open container laws, which is international humanitarian law. Yeah, so for the uninitiated, is war just a free-for-all, or no, there are rules?
I mean, war was a free-for-all for some time, and then the idea came around that it was just too gruesome, too barbaric, and that there should be some rules in place that were agreed to by all of the different actors, the states. The idea was that, it's not just because like people decide to follow the law. That the motivating factor is that if I treat your POWs a certain way, that you will also treat my POWs the same way. So it's like, we're going to war, but we've agreed that there's like these basic standards, and we abide by them, not because we are so law abiding, but because of the
Yeah, it's in people's self-interest not to be insane.
Usually you're hoping that you're working with like people that are rationally based in that way. Because of course there are kamikaze pilots.
Yeah.
There are, it's not always the case, but you hope that, like, especially, you're dealing with states at the time anyways, when the laws of war were created. It was, I mean, just horrific, horrific, horrific. Um, Now it's horrific in a different way. I mean, Gaza exceptionally, but they didn't have technology, so it was a real, very personal bloodbath of just people without the sort of distance of the drone or the anything. And so there was a lot of interest in trying to, I think, I mean, I don't really have the statistics on how well the idea. There's whether, your question of whether war is legal is a separate question. Um, there's I guess in the Latin, it's the jus, um, is it just ad bellum and jus bellus? One is like the Latin for the legality of going to war, of the aggression, and then there's the laws of war, which are like, we don't talk about, or we're not really getting into whether or not.
Yeah, I feel like right now people act as if something's war, then it's a permission structure that everything goes. But no, people have been tried and prosecuted for crimes done under the banner of war. So tell us about your work for the former Yugoslavia. I'm a '90s kid. I was born in '93, and I watched a documentary. I watched the PBS documentary, the trial of Radko Mladic, and it's wild to me. Like, people don't realize that there were literally two genocides in the '90s, same time as the Spice Girls. Spice Girls were singing. Some people were playing with Pogs. I think it was Pogs and Crazy Bones, Pokemon, and other people were being slaughtered for their ethnicities. So what went down in the
I
former
mean,
Yugoslavia?
well, like that was an ethnic war, basically, um, between the different, like, as the former Yugoslavia, the states of the former Yugoslavia, or the Republic of the former of Yugoslavia was breaking up, and there were, I mean, this is going back a long time, but the Serbs were trying to create an ethnically pure, like, Greater Serbia. The Croats were trying to do the same. I would say the people that were the primary victims were the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosniaks. And then there was also a little bit later Kosovo, which was ethnically Albanian, and was also, the Serbs wanted to make it also part of Greater Serbia. So hopefully I got that right. I mean, like, the actual ins and outs of the history of, like, what happened there versus the crimes themselves that were committed. I mean, there were some that I think were maybe popular in the popular conscience, like Sarajevo, because there was the Olympics. A lot of people knew.
Yeah, people had heard of it. It's a European city, and
Yeah. And to see, it was like a lot of there was it in Sarajevo? There were a couple of cities where there was a lot of sniping going on, very similar to the aid seeker, scenario of people in Palestinians in Gaza being sniped by, mercenaries or the IDF with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as they're trying to get food and they're starving. And so there was something similar to that, where civilians were basically in cities and they were trying to run from one place to another to get food or whatever, and that they were being sniped at. So I do remember that there was like a particular case or set of accused that were all sort of lumped together in that kind of um
the crime itself is
well, that targeting, the war crime of targeting civilians. So yeah, so basically, I mean, war crimes, you have to show that there's a war going on. And that is the first thing you have to prove. And then you decide whether you like have to make the case, or it needs to be analyzed, whether it is an international armed conflict or civil, a domestic national armed conflict, because there are different laws that apply and different Geneva Conventions, because there's 4 Geneva Conventions, and so some there's different sets of laws. They're kind of similar, but yeah. And then the war crimes generally are yeah, these kinds of rules of basic standards of how we treat the enemy and how they treat us. And I mean, assuming that it kind of falls apart if one side isn't complying respecting it. And so there's, the rules about POWs. There's rules about, I mean, the main rules are not to target civilians, not to target civilian structures. Basically, that what you target it has to be a military target. It has to, or you're targeting actual soldiers or militants or people that are part of the conflict and that are actively participating in it. They can't be like hors de combat, like they can't be a soldier who's not fighting and you just target them for that reason. Like they're like on, you know, their weekend. I don't know, whatever. They're with their family. They're not actually, you're just supposed to target people that are actually fighting, and military targets. And then there is a whole set of would much harder to prove and deal with, but targeting and like, collateral, basically that the proportionality of the strike, that, the bomb that you drop is, um, that is justifiable, the amount of collateral damage that's being done for the level of target that you're hitting. And then there's a lot of also rules or laws around what kind of weapons are or are not allowed because they are disproportionate. Because, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like reading just about the basics about war crimes and raw laws. It seems almost analogous to like the Second Amendment, that like the founding fathers wrote, like the Second Amendment, right to bear arms shall not be infringed, when it was literally just like a musket that you load and can shoot one person. And they did not foresee machine guns, the machine guns that are now easily accessible and taken into schools. And would you say it's like analogous that now war crimes law is not written to account for the insane amount of technology that's being dropped from the skies? It feels like the new technological developments should get on paper.
Right. Well, so I think that it is, those things are, the weapons can, maybe they're not specifically outlawed because there hasn't been like a treaty or an update to any of the kind of conventions that deal with, the use of chemical weapons or nuclear weapons, or like there are laws on all of these things. And so I think the laws on targeting, like on proportionality, in the case where the technology that you're using um, isn't targeted towards your military objective, and pretty much is, if it is, and it's also out of you don't have a control over it, and it just sort of takes on its own brain and, or consciousness. Okay, worst case scenario. But there are these already in Gaza, these like explosive robots, basically, that go and kill people. I mean, these kinds of things, I think there is a case. I mean, first of all, they're targeting civilians, and like we know the kinds would be still fall within, the laws of war as they are written. Blessed be he.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting learning about Srebrenica. So that was a massacre in Bosnia, um, where, yeah, Ratko Mladic slaughtered 8,000 men. And it sounded familiar in that like Bosnian forces were saying it was as an act of revenge and they needed the space. Like what is the playbook that you saw as a lawyer, and how does it apply to what we're seeing now?
um I mean, that was similar in that it was a safe zone, like it was a UN protected area that they were all gathered in. I'm pretty sure. I think that
It
that
was,
was,
yes.
yeah. So that kind of felt familiar. There's always, I mean, I think, really it was, well, Chris Ditch, who was related to, but all related to that crime of Srebrenica, where it was Bosnian Muslim men between certain ages, like fighting, let's say ages like 18 to whatever, 50 or 60 or something, that were slaughtered there. But the character of what happened in the former Yugoslavia, I'd say much more than a genocide, would be described as an ethnic cleansing, because it was a like ethnic purification, greater Serbia or Croatia um, type of conflict. So there's overlap in, obviously, with Palestine, because that's been an ethnic cleansing project from the beginning. I think a lot of people, I feel like the term ethnic cleansing was coined because of, or for, to describe what the war in the former Yugoslavia was. Um,
New term just dropped. Yeah.
yeah, it's not. It's not a crime. It describes crimes, but it's not in itself. Like, you don't open up this Rome statute, or the statute that we were working with, that was written for the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. It's not like ethnic cleansing is there as one of the crimes. It's more just a linguistic description of what was going on. The crimes were war crimes, or crimes against humanity, or this one charge of genocide. Um,
Interesting.
crimes.
So yeah, what were the crimes like on the books? What are these dudes? What did you get them in jail for? Like the guy who drank poison, what was he convicted of that
I mean,
motivated
that was
him?
after I was already long gone by that point. And I was also not, I was there when Milosevic died in detention. I was not there when, with Mladic or Karadzic. Those were the two main guys, the big guys under Milosevic, who were overseeing, Srebrenica and other, they were, Serbian generals. Um, I was already gone. Those guys were still like on the run. Like, we didn't have them yet in custody. It was, the thing where the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, what was very unique about that is, in the end, everybody that was indicted, which were 161 defendants, were all processed, whether they were like lower level and then sent back to the region, like back domestically to their countries, which, in the meantime, there was also a project to build up the capacity of the judicial systems there to handle like all of the lower level war criminals.
Locally
And
in Bosnia as opposed to in The Hague?
in Bosnia, yeah, and I think in all three, in Bosnia, in Croatia, and in Serbia, um, there was an effort by the international community to, and there were people that I know that went and like worked on that. And so we did, over time, like transfer people to face trial there, because that's like, ideally, justice is served in the place where the crimes happen. It's just very difficult, and in most cases, like in a scenario like, Rwanda or the former Yugoslavia, you don't it's not a place where there's going to be a real trial of any, it's not really realistic that domestically they're either unwilling or unable to really carry out a fair. And so that's where the international community comes in as like a secondary kind of jurisdiction. But ideally, the countries themselves are able to properly try people for these crimes. Uh, so all of them, so either they died, they were transferred back, or they were put on trial, and you know a few, I think, maybe were released or not found guilty or something. But in general, most people were all, but also 161 were all processed in some way or another. And we had all of them there because of the circumstance that, a lot of these people were being protected, like Radko Mladic, or, by being hidden, really. I mean, there were sort of NATO and Interpol capture the accused and bring them to the Hague, but um, you know, the ones that had a lot of popular support, and thought that this was a whole sham. We were like a sham, like, I mean, Western, hypocritical, like not a real tribunal, that it was, they had, their story. So, but because the states of the former Yugoslavia, a condition of them becoming part of the EU was that they had to cooperate with us. And so over time, the cost of not joining the EU was starting to like become higher than how much they cared about these guys. And so they, eventually they turned them over. They were captured. I mean, Karadzic is an incredible story because he was, hiding out in plain sight as a guru. I don't know if you know about his
Oh
story.
my gosh, no, that's
No,
crazy.
but he's a character. When I was like, wrote a pilot about a sitcom that takes place in a war crimes tribunal. The accused for the first season is based on Karadzic because just grew out a big beard or had like a man bun, was doing like self-help and
Oh my
selling
God.
pills and like back before Rogan, he didn't have a podcast, but he was like out, it's not like he was on Oprah or whatever, but like he was absolutely hiding in plain sight as like some kind of guru, self-help guy, and also sort of like poet and
The
sometimes,
war criminal to self-help
I
influencer
mean, honestly,
pipeline.
if you look at some classic, if you just look up memes of self-help quotes, they could, out of context, they could sound like the words of a, authoritarian, a dictator, or it's a lot of cleanse. Cleanse is very big.
Yeah.
cleanse your cleanse your mind, cleanse your environment. Like there's not there is like some overlap in those kinds of personalities. And so and then he was finally brought in. But yeah, I recommend people look it up because it's quite a crazy story. Very cinematic. Um
Dance like Interpol isn't watching. So, but that's interesting. So it was international pressure that got.
There was this sort of not just international pressure, but that there was a sort of carrot on the other end of the stick, which was EU membership and what comes with like the economic benefits of that. No other that's like a circumstantial thing that does not exist for other tribunals that have had a hard time, you know, depending on the situation, getting the accused that they've indicted into the docket. Um, Yeah, I would say, the Rwandan tribunal, basically, like, the tribunal for Rwanda was created right afterwards, like, 1993 when you were born. This the
Mixed
Security
mixed
Council.
year for the planet. Yeah.
Well, it was a really good year in the UN because it was like just right after the Cold War, suddenly the Security Council, because now, because it was deadlocked for the whole Cold War because of Russia and the US, both either one using their veto. And so nothing was really happening. And then once the Cold War ended, there was sort of like this feeling of maybe we can move things forward. I don't know if that's also when apartheid ended in South Africa, but there was the idea of humanitarian intervention resurfaced. We have to do something about genocide and about ethnic cleansing. That
Only
was
90s kids remember.
the
This
90s were like I don't know. I feel like they were, yeah, music for a lot of things. Definitely for the Security Council because that's when basically the most like the primary job of the UN is to safeguard international peace and security. And and one of the major principles of that is that you cannot take land by force like anymore. Like that was like now that the UN is starting, like we're not doing this anymore. And if somebody does, then then we're going to do something about it. And so the main powers that the UN has are the Security Council powers under Chapter 7 of the Charter, and that's where the Security Council can order like a bunch of different kinds of mechanisms in order to help restore international peace and security. And so what they used their Chapter 7 powers for in 1993 was because at that time, the pictures of what was going on in the former Yugoslavia were coming out, the very, Holocaust coded, that's not the wrong
Yeah.
word, but very like, yeah, reminiscent of the Holocaust. It was giving Holocaust. And yeah, they were, people were just skeletal white Europeans. And those photos, once they came out into the mainstream press, there was a feeling of like, we can't have this. And the Security Council created, using its Chapter 7 powers for the first time, an international war crimes tribunal. And what was interesting but it took some time from 1993 when they did that to actually the tribunal existing in The Hague, the staff being there. And then it was really like a process of building these cases. Nothing had really been done like in this world since Nuremberg, and maybe the like Japanese what tribunal, but whatever, I forget what it
Yeah,
was called.
Tokyo trial, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was sort of very new territory, because at that point the idea for a permanent court like the International Criminal Court existed, but there had not been the political will to do it. And so the first real tribunal since Nuremberg was the one for the former Yugoslavia. That was 1993. 1994 was a genocide in Rwanda. And there was like the sense like we just created this for the former Yugoslavia. We can't not do it for Rwanda now. And so a tribunal was created just right after, like the next, in 1994. I mean, both of them took some time to get up and running, but
Yeah, tell us about it, because I feel like people know that there was a movie with Don Cheadle, but that's about it. That Don Cheadle was in a Rwandan genocide movie and then now stars as War Machine in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that's the extent of people's understanding.
okay. That they know a lot about Don Cheadle's career,
Yeah.
basically.
Or the Rwanda genocide's just a footnote to Don Cheadle's career. I don't think people realize that, yes, there were genocides in the 90s.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Rwanda, I mean, just basically that what I guess the hallmark, the like the real the thing, like I said, with the former Yugoslavia, it was really the ethnic cleansing and the sort of purification and the greater this and that territory. In Rwanda, it was the case of, the Belgians had been the colonial power in Rwanda, and so the Belgians had created a distinction between they're exactly the same in the sense of like there's no actual ethnic distinction, but they divided the population, and I don't know if it was how they decided, but anyways, into Hutus and Tutsis, into like two separate groups of really the same people. I don't know if maybe the Tutsis were sort of privileges that more the privileges of more upper class of some kind. I don't know if it was sort of they were the like landowners or farmers or something, and that's where they're like, you are the Tutsis. So there was a lot of propaganda that laid the groundwork for. I mean, Rwanda is such a horrible case of how truly neighbors who are ethnically exactly the same, with enough propaganda. And the main, like, there is, I would say, relevant, speaking to like things from prior genocides and war crimes trials that are of relevance to what's happening now in Israel Palestine, as a lot of us have and observed and said and spoken up about. The media has been a big factor in allowing this genocide to go on, to be justified, to go unchecked for 2 years now. There, it plays a very big role. And Rwanda was a case where it was called Radio Télévision Mille Collines, or just Radio Mille Collines. Anyway, it was a lot of just constant barrage of the radio spewing, like the Tutsis are cockroaches, like, basically animals, like like all of that kind of stuff. And it was, I think, like a plane crash that set it off, like one of these kind of, unrelated, but it just sparks the whole thing. I did a little bit of work in between undergrad and law school with an NGO that was based in Montreal that did psychosocial programming for immigrant and refugee kids. And some of the stuff was done in refugee camps in the former Yugoslavia, or in like Sierra Leone, or in and then some in with them in Canada if they come in their schools. And it was basically to do kind of like art therapy, like
That's
expressive
amazing.
type of activities, like drama, theater, like theater kid to comedian pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just remember the drawings that the kids did, not necessarily with me there, but we got the drawings in our office, and it was, like gang rape scenes,
Oh,
that kids had drawn, like, and just, yeah, machetes and blood, and like just body parts cut off. And yeah, that was really, really horrific. And yet still, it was not live streamed on my phone in, you know, HD quality, like for 700 days straight. Anyway, so I'd say that that was really the defining characteristic of Rwanda, was that these people were essentially, the same people, but because of colonialism, they had been divided. And then the propaganda, the media really um, fueled the fire. And then it was just truly neighbors turning on each other. I mean, it was also, there were like militant groups, and, they were, yeah, organized also. It wasn't only that, but, and so, yeah, so the tribunal, so the tribunal for Rwanda was created, was in the trial level. There was, the trial level and the appeals. We had a trial level and appeals level for the former Yugoslavia in the tribunal that I was at in The Hague. There was a trial level um, tribunal for Rwanda created in Arusha, Tanzania. And then we were also the appeals chamber for Rwanda. So they didn't create a whole, like a two instance um, tribunal. They just sort of decided, yeah, it just became that the appeals would come to us in The Hague, to the appeals chamber. So I worked for a judge in the appeals chamber. So when my judge was on the bench for an appeal from a Rwandan case, then I'd work on that. So it was sort of, and a couple times we went down to the tribunal to hear, like, whatever. You don't hear too much evidence or too many witnesses on appeal. It's more like questions of law, but a couple of times, or to deliver the verdict. So I got to go to Arusha, that was really fun. That part. Go to safari afterwards, and yeah. That was like the heyday, I feel like, of the UN too, because like now my friends, that are still there, it's like seeing on KLM, and if you're in business, they have these little houses that people collect that are sort of like
cute little, like,
white
yeah,
and
Dutch
blue.
windmills.
Yeah, no, it's almost like the Delft blue, like those kind of plates that are, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, yeah, those are
The
beautiful.
Delft blue. So it's like that, but they're like little, yeah, houses. And I think we never opened them because I think it like took away the collectible aspect, but I'm pretty sure it was.
Ooh. But yeah, the 90s really do sound like a golden age for war crimes, justice. Right now, it's feeling like the only form of justice we have is public shaming. Like, the ICJ court case for Gaza does exist, but do do you think?
I mean, so yeah, so I should explain. So the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is a court that is an arm of the United Nations. It's like a key arm of the United Nations, because in that idea of that, the UN's job is to maintain, preserve, defend like international peace and security. The idea with the ICJ is that rather than go to war because your fishing boat came and took my fish in my waters or whatever, that you would go, or you have an issue with a border dispute about where the line is, and it was like drawn on a like river, and the river changed course, or like all of these sort of things, like people like, let's just go to court if we cannot resolve it instead of going to war. And so the International Court of Justice, by and large, it deals mostly with that kind of stuff. Like, although the law of the sea, I would say, has its own, there's a separate tribunal for the, the law of the sea. Um, but but it's a lot of border related stuff most of the time. It normally has not been the case that it's been dealing with questions of genocide. Um, because it's states taking other states to court. Um, and so it's not in a, no one's going to jail. It's more like, okay, Russia, you owe Ukraine X amount of dollars, or this sort of thing. The tribunal that the ad hoc, basically, so if there were the ad hoc International Criminal Tribunal, so like the one for Yugoslavia, the one for Rwanda, that they were limited in jurisdiction to a certain territory or to a certain period of time. There was one for Cambodia that was sort of a mixed international and domestic one. There was Sierra Leone. I mean, even when I was there, they created the Hariri Tribunal in The Hague for when Hariri and his several other government officials and his government were blown to bits in Beirut. And none of my friends that went to work at the tribunal, not a single person was brought to The Hague. Like there were none of the accused. They were unable to get any of the accused. And so they're just doing sort of like in absentia. They're like just writing the rules of procedure, writing academic articles. It's just, they weren't. So, and then the International Criminal Court was created. And the idea there is that it was sort of like a permanent court that would hear it, rather than creating these courts each time. The US much preferred this ad hoc way of doing things, because then it could decide like that it wasn't involved in that thing, and it didn't need to worry that any Americans or any soldiers or politicians or anyone in the US military industrial complex would get tried, so they felt so they were supportive of Rwanda. They have not been supportive. They have been there from the beginning, giving their, and I'm not even talking about Trump now with Israel, but trying to make these side agreements with other countries, that because even if you're not a signatory, if one of your soldiers commits a war crime in the territory of a state that is a signatory, they are liable. And so, like, for example, Israel is not a signatory, but crimes committed by the IDF in Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza, Palestine is a signatory. So the US was trying to make agreements with different countries that like they would never send an American, even if they were on their territory and they were indicted, to the eyes, like just trying to, from day one. And Israel is same thing, trying to sabotage the court from day one, even though this entire international legal order was created because as a response to the Holocaust. And and the United States was, a very big proponent of these principles and of this legal.
Yeah, that's what's one of the many things that's been so disappointing about the Jewish community over the past 2 years is like growing up in addition to the Holocaust being the sixth book of the Torah, learning the the ins and outs and why it was horrific and never again, is also we worship doctors and lawyers, But now we have people saying, like, no, you can't trust the courts. Courts don't solve problems. International humanitarian law doesn't apply to us. And then also people trying to say, like, oh, Doctors Without Borders, that's their, you can't trust them. Like, do people not hear themselves?
Like family, friends, or
Hmm.
random, family members who are not lawyers, or I just know that what they just are so deep in the mental illness of Zionism, and I can only imagine. I mean, it's like these people are now sharing like more and more extreme and obvious propaganda. Like they don't even share the New York Times. The New York Times for them is anti-Semitic. I just picture this sort of circle, right? That keeps this gets like smaller and smaller until like it's like only they are the only ones that are not anti-Semitic. Like they're
Yeah.
just standing there in the tiniest like little.
And is that sustainable? And then will they be surprised when they can't make a minion?
I mean, God, they are. It's wild to witness I didn't know the term crash out really until recently, and I just find it so
Yeah.
good one. Yeah, they are
It's
crashing out.
evocative. Yeah.
Yeah. The more people see, the harder it gets to deny, the more they're crashing out and lashing out. And I would say for me, one of the most, and I wish, I have thought about reaching out to try to have a real conversation with him. But one of my mentors and professor of law that I was the reason that I decided to go into human rights work and then law, because I realized I kind of had to do law. It wasn't that I was dying to be a lawyer, but I was, if I faint in a second at the sight of blood, I don't know. I can't do math and science. I cannot build a well. I can't do forensics and dig up a mass grave. Like it's not in my, like, it's not for me. So I'm like,
Hmm.
what could I, do? Law would be the thing. And, but yeah, his name is Erwin Kotler, and he was a professor at McGill, the law school, who
Yeah,
also,
I've heard the name.
know him. Yeah, he does a lot of, mm, especially focused on freeing political prisoners over the years in every place. But when it comes to Israel, and I didn't when I worked for him in the 90s as an intern before going to law school, I have these like memories of, and I was still indoctrinated then. I didn't know, but I kind of remember like the new anti-Semitism, or like Dershowitz's book coming and then being like, I'm honored to be the American Erwin Kotler, or like just these, and his case for basically for like human rights case sort of being like that Israelis have a right, like a human right, not to be subjected to terrorism, or like there was these kinds of like framings that I was sort of like I'd kind of see, and I didn't pay that much attention to. But over the years, as I have become unindoctrinated or deprogrammed, it's become harder for me to understand him, because he's one of these people who um is a mentor, is somebody who I really is really smart and very principled, and he's remained so. It's not like I don't meet your heroes, or like he was like on Epstein's plane or anything like that. He's like truly just the most humble, low key, dedicated person, to this cause. And he relies on and doesn't have an issue, as far as I know, with Human Rights Watch or with Amnesty International. And these are all part of the world in which he works, and you know to release political prisoners in various countries. And so it's like I don't know how one knows the law, is intelligent, is really empathetic and caring, dedicated their whole life in dangerous situations sometimes, to freeing political prisoners, and also knows the international system, is a part of the international system, the UN, and all of these groups, relies on their work, and then yet still thinks that they're anti-Semitic in this case or something. I don't know. I mean, I haven't asked him, but I know that he is one of the people who called the the fact that South Africa was bringing this case to criminal the International Court of Justice, for him was like this inversion, it was like the inversion of the Holocaust, and he was very much against it. And and he even said that he thought that Nelson Mandela would be against it. And it's just could
The
he
chutzpah to speak on behalf of Nelson
yeah,
Mandela.
and you know what? Because he also, and I don't know to what extent, but he does have in his bio that he was on the legal team for Nelson Mandela to get him out of prison as a political prisoner, that he played a role in that somehow. I don't know really to what extent, what kind of to how central he was on the legal team and et cetera, but it came from that. And it's also that the Nelson Mandela's first act when he came out of jail was to go see Yasser Arafat. It's, I mean, you've seen the talking point, like, where's the Palestinian Nelson Mandela? And it's like
In prison.
all of Nelson Mandela's family, like his grandson is on the flotilla right now. The Nelson Mandela Institute had a press release supporting the South African case. It's, I don't know what happens. Like, it's truly makes no sense. And in a case like him, where he's not just like my mother, reacting hysterically to something, I don't know what goes on in the brain to know everything, and then still reach this conclusion. I mean, his wife is Israeli, and she has a daughter that was like a Likud party member in the Knesset, and there's definitely that thing going on, and she's very extreme. So I think in his world, he's seen as like practically Hamas, but it needs to be studied, because it's just so crazy to watch. It's so crazy to watch.
You use your legal skills in such conversations online and in person. Um, do you have any highlights of a
Oh my God, I have so
confrontation?
many, but you know what I'll tell you? I felt kind of proud of this argument I made recently. And this is because my family and community, that mostly with the exception of my brother-in-law, are all liberals. They don't like Trump. They're liberals in Canada. They vote liberal in Canada. They will never connect the dots to the system, but they don't deny, horrors that happen, and the police, and um but they're kind of okay with the status quo, as we know. Like that, they're liberal. So I was having this argument because there were still the idea that I've been saying that it was a genocide since it was literally announced that a genocide was going to be committed by the Israeli leadership by October 9th or 10th,
It was, yeah, for those who don't know, it was, yeah, Yoav Gallant straight up saying no food, no water, no electricity. And for a hot sec, Sarah Silverman defended it on Instagram, but then took it down and said she was high. But no, these are things that the leaders were saying on camera in front of people. It's not a secret.
Not a secret at all. And I was really clear about, I mean, basically, I felt like this is the moment I've been training for, between the Holocaust education and then being so traumatized by that I decided to go into this line of work. And, in between, to have interviewed Holocaust survivors in Montreal in their apartments for an oral history project or whatever other things. And then and I know what the what the signs are,
You've
what
tried it
the
in
bell
court.
is playing. And so I turned around, first of all, I knew now after October 7th, they were all online. They were all cognizant of what was happening. It wasn't like all of the other years where it's like a slow ethnic cleansing, and I know they don't see what's going on, and I'm not allowed to talk about it if I want to have a relationship with them. And so but at this point, I knew they were all paying attention. And so when the announcement was made, and then I turned around and I said, like, a genocide's being announced, and no, and it was, well, war is war. It's
Hmm.
your, well, it's tragic. Or, I don't know if they were pulling it's Hamas's fault, probably. I mean, they have at certain points. It was a really destabilizing moment for me because I felt like everything um, that I knew to be true and just to be so dismissed, and like derided. And, it wasn't just that they didn't listen to me. It was that they also felt personally attacked by my warning about Israel committing a genocide. It's like so painful for my mother. It's so painful for my mother for me to say a true fact that is a painful fact, but it's not me that's doing it, like I'm
Right.
not.
I
But
I
how they identify themselves, it's a genius thing that they like that the Zionist project has managed to do. But oh, this was my argument. So more recently, as things have become, I think, quite obvious, and more people, the expert, have said it's a genocide. But even there were a year ago, it was also the consensus, I would say, but certainly now. And when I said this about, like, well, now you can see the thing I was warning about, and has happened. It's happening more and more so every day. It's proven to a greater extent than the day before. And they say, well, I don't know. They'll acknowledge what's happening. They'll acknowledge the starvation. I mean, not everybody, let's say the immediate people around me of Zionist family. But they're the sort of, it's Netanyahu, it's whatever, that they won't say, not my sister, but my mother, my stepfather, they still have not said it's a genocide. And they'll still suggest that, like, it's a matter of opinion. And anyway, so this was a roundabout way to say I was proud of this argument. Is I said, if the consensus opinion, international opinion of experts, of humanitarian organizations, of human rights experts, of international criminal lawyers, of genocide and Holocaust studies, academics, professors, if the consensus of their opinion is that it is a genocide, and you don't agree, it has to be because of ideological reasons. Well, no, I mean, but because you agree, like, then they try to both sides. Well, like, nothing's true. It's like, well, but then maybe you're like thinking that for ideological reasons. And I said, remember when the consensus medical expert opinion was that we should take a vaccine during COVID,
Wow.
and that there were a lot of people that felt, despite the consensus medical opinion, that they disagreed and they were going to do their own research and not do the vaccine? Don't you think, like, that was a case of the people who did not agree with the consensus expert medical opinion? They were disagreeing for ideological reasons. That's who you are now.
That's smart. Yeah, doing your own research. If it's not Joe Rogan, it's Barry Weiss. It's still the
And
same.
because I know how frustrated they were by that, by people that weren't taking the vaccine, that were, the anti-vax movement. I know that they were very against that. And so that was that was a good moment. That was a good new and more recent. I've tried to think, I've had so many rhetorical tricks between whether it's like just roast. I mean, between law and comedy, I like make the case, and I also sometimes roast people. I mean, it makes me laugh so much when people on my page, like, because they're, with me, that, like, oh, you're so patient. I'm like, you're really so patient, and I don't know how you have the strength. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, I'm posting this exchange because I went in for the kill.
Yeah.
And it's for catharsis. I'm like, I know this is not to, like, win that person over. I've already know they're not winnable. And so I'm just going to humiliate them and give that little bit of power and catharsis to you guys, because you see a lot of shit, like just horror. And so perhaps this is like a little feeling, a little bright spot, a little like bit of feeling empowered. And also I post those sort of back and forths from comment sections to give people like, to copy paste anything. I haven't sort of set it out in like the best way for that, like in terms of slides and like, here's what you say to this. But in many cases, I will.
Yes, there are other so practical advice for listeners. It's engage with trolls if you have a comeback and it would be satisfying, but accept that you're not going to win them over.
Yeah. It's often the performance in the comment section outside of if I don't, repost everything for my audience is that there's always people that are reading comment sections, and they're just the people that are there with the popcorn.
Hmm.
And that's who I want to also see. I don't want this person to get away with, I mean, for me, like the dehumanizing of Palestinians. There's been, I would say, I mean, the main sort of mic drop moment always is to when they say, well, it's not like you're an expert on, oh, how do you know what genocide is or whatever, and then I get to say, well, I worked at International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda in The Hague as a lawyer. What have you done?
Yeah.
Like those moments are. I mean, that's really looking back. Have been the main
And if you can't,
benefit of going to law school for me has been that. That's
exactly. And if you can't say that you were a former prosecutor, you can always quote the former prosecutor. You've taken one for the team. I also have another question. So
yeah.
we established that, like, yes, courts, the United Nations exists, courts exist ostensibly as a way to solve problems without warfare. So
Yeah, and also just to be clear, the International Criminal Court or the tribunal where I was at, that the point of that is to assign individual criminal responsibility to the people responsible so as to not be stuck in a cycle of violence, which is what collective punishment leads to, where if you don't hold the individual, like what should have happened after October 7th, and what I
exactly,
wrote
that was what I was going to ask. Yeah,
is that when they're like, what could we do? It's like, there was already a process at the International Criminal Court that was opened in May of 2021. So, and Hamas had been open to cooperating, and the PA were the ones that brought the case, and Israel just basically punished them for doing so be- because they're not allowed to resist in any way, whether it be peaceful protests or anything, right? Everything is a threat. And so that is the point. The state to state at the International Court of Justice is a way for states to resolve their issues in court with each other rather than go to war over a border, essentially. And in the other tribunals, in the international criminal tribunals, those are uh, criminal cases against individual perpetrators to um, avoid collectively punishing or also just blaming an entire ethnic or religious group.
and yeah, and instead of talking about what Israel is doing, had they gone the legal route, we would have spent the last 2 years talking about what Hamas did. It was sh- kind of
Yeah,
an
and also because I know I have gotten the sense now from, there's been many times and I still do to some extent wait to see if like some horror thing that I hear or even something that almost is like sounds like conspiracy that Israel has done, that when I first hear things like that can't be true. Oh, there's no way, and every single time, I've been wrong. There is almost nothing that I've heard horrific that turned out to be false. And I feel like at this point, and the reason why I'm sure Hamas was cooperating is because at the end of the day, many things that they've been accused about and have been used as an excuse to commit, like basically Israel has taken the concept, and they're not the only country to do this in the history of conflict. Um, Actually, there's a very good citations needed episode on human shields, which I really recommend because it contextualizes it in other places where has been used, um, basically by the more powerful or imperial West, Russia or the U.S. and Vietnam. It's been used before, but essentially, it's like it's a real concept, as you really should not use human shields. But to then take that concept and use it as a justification for genocide is really like turning everything on its head. It's like to use a a law is meant to protect civilians from being used in this way as a reason to annihilate them is, you know, so it's like there's so many of these moments where I'm like, ah,
Exactly.
I was like shaking.
This gesture has, yeah, had a lot of play over the last 2 years.
I have not seen any evidence of human shield. Dean, I have not seen any evidence of any hospital close to meeting the standard for being attacked and destroyed. I mean, like this is why Hamas was cooperating because they're like, okay, like let's see it, like properly, not Hasbara. And there are clear war crimes that Hamas has committed. But so much of what Israel says is complete bullshit. Can you say that on
Oh my
here?
God, please. Yeah. Or, yeah.
That, yeah, of course. And every other player that has no access to like bazillions of dollars in weaponry and propaganda and is, it runs pretty deep in the media here. Of course, they'd be like, let's go in front of a court.
So if we want to wrap on a case for hope. I want people to know that, yeah, if the community you grew up in, if you find viscerally disgusted, if there are other communities that will welcome you with open arms. There are ways to build community around things that aren't making excuses for objectively horrible shit.
I asked you a question
Sure, yeah.
for something that I've been just more recently, like listening to some things that have caused me to question this idea of I very strongly for a very long time now have said that um, Zionism isn't Judaism, and I'm not so sure anymore in the sense that it survives. But now, you know, I guess I've listened to a couple of I don't know if you've heard, is it Yuval Harari speak to this question on that podcast, Unholy? There's a few rabbis too that have, like, I just don't know enough about the religion in a way to assess, like, and in the history of the Jewish people and the way that the religion, the transformations that the religion has made. Like, I guess I always was like, this is what Judaism is. It's what I know. And I hope that it is the values of Judaism and are antithetical to Zionism. But I don't know if it's always good, if we can say that forever. Like, I don't know if at one point it's just like, this is what Judaism is in this period of time. And then it's sort of like raises the question of, how do you remain a Jew kind of. Is that
Yeah.
right? That's like a lot at the very end to be like,
No,
is-
I've, I know I struggle with these questions all the time. So I try to like zoom out and remind myself, like, no, this is a thousands of year old thing. And what the first Zionist Congress was in 1897. Like Alt Neuland was only written 200 years ago. Like I like to think that there's more to it, but the way that our institutions are structured, I think that's why, yeah, building new ones are all the more important. Because like I hate to give up thousands of years because of this
there
blight.
is the part of being Jewish that's not the religion in a way, and there is, the liberatory politics and the community building and all of that that can still be, and maybe there'll be different branches of Judaism, not in the way that we have them now, but in a, there's the Israel Judaism, and then there's
Yeah, yeah, sacrifices. That's why, like, so many things are in place of bringing goats to the temple.
yeah. But then it was really just from the second temple destruction until the creation of the state of Israel that the religion became what we know it to be, which is about learning and study, etc. And we weren't a sovereign people, and we were in exile, and that these were the values of when you say, like, it's not Zionism isn't Judaism. We're thinking about those 2,000 years. But he talks about that, basically, that at that time, when the Romans conquered, and like, the Jews sort of, he talks about, like, this one particular guy who asked the Roman leader if we could be in a certain town, if we could have a certain town, and then this sort of became the center of Jewish study, and then from there it kind of, went on for like 2,000 years. But basically, he says that, I- if and then we came back and we got our state, or our sovereignty, or this, and what were those 2,000 years of study for, if this is what it is? Like, what did we learn in those 2,000 years? What we could have done is just ask the Romans, how do you build to go to fight in war? How do you um, get to a place where you find joy in crushing those who are weaker than you? We didn't need 2,000 years of study and questioning and developing of this kind of intellectual, um, you know, Judaism.
I know that's why we could just hope that this isn't the end, and or at least, yeah, have Talmudic discussions such as this. The irony being that, like, this hour and a half has been like the most Jewish, most Jewish engagement as what I consider Jewish. That's why the purpose, I hope, in this podcast to try to, distance the thousands year history from weapons manufacturing. But if that's what the community wants, and they want to be synonymous with the military industrial complex, then we have our own communities. Like, this isn't a plug, but I do plan on going. There is going to be a Yizkor on Yom Kippur in Grand Army Plaza again. Um,
I was
so
there last time. It was so beautiful.
yeah, me too. I hate that we have to do it again. That it's not over, but we'll do that again. But yeah, I guess we can just keep trying and keep hoping this isn't the end, because that is just a horrible ending. It's almost a Greek tragedy, isn't it? Like, you become what you fear. You horrible.
The reason for the state of Israel, like, was, it was driven from a secular place, to survive persecution, the pogroms in Eastern Europe, and then, the Holocaust that came, that really ended the question. And it was anti-Semites who didn't, set the conditions for us to
Yeah,
have
they
to
didn't want to take Jewish refugees in yeah, the FDR turned away boats of refugees.
bow for, like, I mean, and it's, and then it became a way for the European anti-Semites to wash their hands of what they did, and still not to have Jews there. And they were like, do this, and now we get to be the front line of what is not really a country, which is essentially a military base dressed up as a country. Told to us as, well, now you're the white, like, just, became the people that came from Russia, they came from Germany, but especially the Russians, those are mostly, they just built, like, what they knew, which was the nation state, and this kind of, um oppressive, society. But like it's just like we're finishing the project by destroying our own selves while sending our like, whatever, being whatever the Christian Zionists want us to be. And being a like a frontline military base for imperial interests, and like, and we're like a big player in it, where and all of this just drives more hatred of Jews. And it also demonizes brown people and Muslims, and like, the Christians just
Laughing all the
set the whole
way.
thing up. They set the whole thing up.
Laughing all the way to the rapture, because at the end of the day,
Exactly.
we're not going to make it.
Can you believe we were so like, I can't believe these people believe in Santa Claus? And meanwhile, the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one light question for you, just if we're leaving now. Is do blondes have more fun?
Oh, good question.
At least you have,
Um, I,
second day blonde.
I know. Oh my gosh! First of all, welcome. I have nothing to compare it to. Born blonde. It's all I've ever known. Uh, but yeah, right now, I don't think any hair color can fix what's going on.
Orly, how dare you? That's what I'm like,
I'm so
hanging
sorry.
everything.
I know. Maybe bangs. I think maybe bangs might solve it.
I mean, yeah, I just need to be I cut, but yeah. I mean, I feel like yes. Maybe bangs. Bangs on top of the blonde.
But for people listening, where can they find you?
I am social media wise primarily on Instagram at Jess_Salomon, SALOMON. And there's a link tree there, and you can, yeah, I'm very responsive. I've really made some friends over the last few years on Instagram, and a whole lives have happened. And I don't know. It's like I feel like I built a little bit of a community there for myself in a lonely time. It sounds so sad. People at the beginning were like, "Wow, I didn't expect you to respond," and I'm like, "Well, I'm going through a divorce. I don't have a wife, and I don't have a family, so it's you guys."
So
Like,
yeah, my DMs are open as well.
yeah. So feel free.
Yeah. And thank you so much. This was a very powerful, wide-ranging, interesting conversation.
I hope I answered questions, and I'm very tangenty and ADHD, so I know sometimes I
No, that's what podcasts are for. That's what
yeah.
Rogan built a career on. The fact that it's only 90 minutes as opposed to 4 hours is already like brevity as far as the podcast pros are concerned. Thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.